Welcome to the Future is Robot podcast. I'm your host, Chandran, and in this podcast, I will interview experts from various fields, including engineering, business, and academia, to discuss the latest advancements in robotics. From practical and affordable implementation of robots to the ethical considerations surrounding their use in our society, join me on a journey to discover what the future may hold for this disruptive and transformative technology. Hello, everyone. So, with us today, we have Nathan George. He is the CEO of Void Robotics and he's extremely active on LinkedIn. That's where I met him for the first time as well. And constantly posts about various robotic innovations, various ideas, and the trends with respect to robotics. And we got to texting on LinkedIn, and here we are as the first, a guest on this podcast. So, hi, Nathan. To begin with, can you just tell us about, how exactly you got into robotics? What was your entry? How was your course or your journey into robotics till now through your company, university, everything?
Sure, yeah, and thanks for having me. Basically, I think I was about 15 or 16, and my school was having a robotics competition. It was called First, FTC, and yeah, no one wanted to code, so I ended up coding, and yeah, we got last place. So the next year, I decided to start a robotics team, and we ended up getting second place at one of our competitions, and I loved it so much. And my teacher even it was actually my teacher who got me interested in it. She was saying, you seem to like this. You should just like skip the whole science course and just work by yourself, and then you can teach yourself. And I'm like, okay, sure. And I decided to, and ever since then, I've just loved robotics.
Mhm. So, what kind of challenge was this? What kind of robotics competition was it?
Yeah, it was called First FTC, First Tech Challenge. So this specific year, the challenge was to lift a bowling ball onto a ramp and to
Okay.
also collect racquetballs using a robotic controlled system. And my team was interesting because we didn't really collect. Most teams tried to collect racquetballs. My team tried to move the bowling ball. So yeah, it was fun.
Okay, that's nice. So after that, how did you decide to go ahead with your undergraduate studies and, how
Yeah, so
exactly did you continue?
yeah, this was back in 2012. So it's kind of weird that's a decade ago because it makes me look old, but Um, basically, I back then there wasn't really robotic degrees, so I just Googled robotics degree, and the college Worcester Polytechnic Institute had one, and so I ended up getting a bachelor's and a master's there.
Okay. And how was the coursework and everything? Like, how did you feel once you entered the program?
Yeah, so at WPI the courses change a lot, like every single year it changed, but I would say unanimously everyone thought robotics was 10 times harder than any other degree. Like I had friends in computer science, electrical, mechanical, math, and robotics was 10 times harder. Like to give you an example, the lab, so most people finish their labs within 3 hours. Maybe they spend a few extra hours. Our labs took 3 hours just to understand it, and then about 40 hours on average. So I would
Oh,
say that, but that was also a while ago, so I don't know if it's changed since then, but yeah, robotics can be quite difficult, but I also think it's one of the best, obviously. So
yeah, definitely. I mean, given how multidisciplinary it is, it really does take far more time because, building upon each of the facets is pretty challenging. So, what kind of these labs did you have actually?
yeah, so in my senior year, there was a lab for like it's called a manipulator or a robotic arm, and we had to learn firmware and we had to learn like bit level stuff and controlling it and getting it to move at certain times, like using inverse kinematics, for example. That one was actually really hard for me because I had no idea what I was doing. And then the next year, the next course was just a simple mobile robot. We used TurtleBots back then.
Mhm.
They were famous back in the day, but yeah, basically we used TurtleBots and I used ROS. So most people probably know about ROS. We used G mapping and just basic stuff like SLAM. which is simultaneous localization and mapping. That was also really difficult back in the day because I actually had to learn Linux in that course while also trying to understand this other stuff. So half the people just dropped out, and then it was kind of funny. Like half the people dropped out, half the people, which was like so the 25% of the people like me just didn't know what we were doing and we just barely scraped by, and then 25% were geniuses that just did most of the work. I wasn't one of those people, but I've also
Mhm.
changed a lot. So
Mhm. So, Ross, I mean, yeah, it's been here for extremely a long time. But yeah, I mean, which version did you start off with? Like,
yeah. So nowadays people are using like melodic, I think, for ROS one, I think, and then for I'm not even sure for ROS two. It's I was using Foxy for a while, and then now I don't know what people are using now. I started out actually. I'm gonna look it up just because I'm really curious. But I started out on Indigo. I don't know if
oh,
you've ever
okay.
have heard of
Yeah.
Indigo, but
I remember
um,
the old textbooks, the first textbooks related to Ross, which I had read, were all on Ross Indigo. So that's the only reason I know about Ross Indigo.
yeah, yeah, I remember. I don't know if you've heard of Atlas. It's like the DARPA robot. It was famous
Hmm.
back then, but yeah, basically there was like 30 people in this project. Not even joking. One person, two people understood how to understood Ross, and I was one of the people who had no idea what we're doing. So I had to like use my teammates' notes, and I taught everyone else. Yeah, it was all in Indigo too. So it
Hmm.
was yeah. I'm really
Yeah.
curious how it's come since then, but
Yeah, I mean, currently at my university, we are using Noetic, which I think is the recent, most recent
oh yeah,
version
no,
since it
yeah,
follows the alphabetical order, melodic, then Noetic. But yeah, I mean, Indigo, that was where I began as well. Yeah. And you also mentioned SLAM. So, what about with respect to the LiDAR and sensors? Did you have to set it all up, or was it the simulation?
um, so in our in college we were given a robot, Turtlebot 2, and we just had to like install the packages and use it. We had to do things like SLAM, PID control. It's all very basic stuff.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, since then I started Void Robotics. You might not know this, but in the beginning I called it New Mind Robotics, and I tried for about a couple years to create a visual SLAM package using RTAB map. And now there's a bunch of other companies doing visual SLAM. They're much better. Um, so so yeah, but SLAM is
Hmm.
very interesting. I'm actually moving away from SLAM. I'm starting to realize, especially from that project, that in the real world, the goal isn't really robot. Like, there needs to be more of a focus on finances. Like, I would
Hmm.
even argue that 90% of our robotics project is finances and business, and maybe 10% is the engineering. So,
Hmm. And since you mentioned about, slam and visual slam and everything, just to give an introduction to people who might not be so well versed with it, how would you probably best describe the entire idea which goes behind
sure.
slam?
So for SLAM, which is simultaneous localization and mapping, in robotics, generally, the first goal is you'll need to know kind of where the robot is. And generally, you would create a map. So you could create a map using LiDAR, which is it's based in light. It bounces off stuff, it comes back. And essentially, you create this map of the environment, kind of like how humans visualize stuff. It's like a 2D map. You could also do the same thing with cameras instead. And visual SLAM just means that you take key points from the images, and it involves a more complex process using convolutions and stuff like that. But basically, you get these important features, and then from that, you create this map. And it's more than just having a map. You'll need to understand where you are in that map. And that's called localization, which is figuring out, like, for example, if the robot drifts on average plus or minus 5 centimeters, where exactly is the robot? Or if you pick up the robot and you move it somewhere else, that's known as the kidnapped robot problem. It's really a difficult problem. So, and basically what SLAM does is it takes all of this data, all this LiDAR camera data, and it creates some. it depends which algorithm you're using. Sometimes they use I forget what it's called now, scan matching or orbs or some other stuff. A bag of words actually. But basically, you from the data you figure out where you are in the map, and it does it automatically for you. So
Okay. And how do you think, practicing or implementing those in back in university actually helped you when you started off Void Robotics?
so in college I worked on various different algorithms and it was good, but I think when I started, I I think college most of the time prepares you to be more like an just a well not just but like an engineer. So like a senior engineer, it doesn't really prepare you almost at all to be like a manager or a CEO. Because when
Mhm.
I started when I actually started my company, I was trying something really crazy, which is deep reinforcement based bird flight. So basically, there's this thing called an ornithopter. I tried getting it to fly using deep learning, which I'm not sure if everyone knows what that is, but it's just using like, well, you train a lot of data and you put it through something called the neural network, and you get an output out of it. It's kind of like a decision tree, but it's much more advanced. So yeah, in my opinion, if a person wanted to start um, a company, I don't actually think going to school is necessary, to be honest. So
Yeah. And you had also mentioned, right, that with respect to robotics, it's mostly finance and business, probably even 90%, while engineering is just 10%. Like how do your experiences relate
yeah,
to that?
so in the robotics world, it's generally known that about 99% of companies fail. Even big companies like Amazon failed in a big project, FedEx failed in a big project. Back in the day, there was a company known as Rethink Robotics, and they were one of the most famous companies. They went completely bankrupt. No one would buy them, and there's a lot of stories like that. And one of the reasons why so many companies fail is because the most common approach is that someone has a really cool idea and then he gets someone else interested and then he tries to build it without thinking about how the end user is going to pay for it. The other approach that happens usually is people who are more business oriented. They try to come in and do it, but because they don't understand, they sometimes think of robotics like building an app or building a house even. I've actually dealt with that. It can be painful because one analogy that I give is that we are able to go to the moon, but we can't get food delivered to us using robots. That's how
Mhm.
difficult robotics is. It's like going to the moon is actually, don't get me wrong, it's hard, but it's really a set of subsystems that are proven and validated. That's all it is. Robotics, on the other hand, it's a bunch of unknowns that are not solved, and they're also just require more difficult algorithms. So
And why do you think, like with as you mentioned, going to space is something which has been conquered, but I mean, even if we were to ask a robot to say fold a napkin, it's really going to have an extremely hard time. So probably fail at the task given. So what do you think are the main, like limitations or reasons why the field of robotics is still not,
yeah,
progressed as much as people thought it would at least?
yeah, I've thought about this for like 5 years, and the vision of my company is to promote and to teach people about the importance of affordable robotics. That's kind of like my catchphrase. Is that a lot of people don't like affordable robotics because it can make them feel like they're just working on a hobby or something, and that's fine. I get that, right? But I think you were asking why. I think why are so many companies failing or why is it so difficult? The reason um like I would argue that a lot of people who come into robotics care more about like the glory or the ego of doing something cool. And sometimes it's more important to like just focus on solving a problem. Focus on solving a problem, and 90% of that is really understanding the user. And it can be boring, it can be very annoying. It's like, right now I'm focusing on food related projects, and it could be boring. I think it's fun personally. So that's probably the number one reason.
Mhm. Yeah, I remember so one of the main reasons why I contacted you in the first place was I did read this one LinkedIn post which you had put up where you had mentioned how, leading companies which were trying to actually implement complicated solutions, whether that's reinforcement learning or extremely complicated forms of machine learning to, solve certain tasks, was still falling short of various extremely simple, tried and tested methods like global positioning system and basic save in, for example, a line follower in a warehouse robot as opposed to using more complicated approaches.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, if that is, that makes sense. I mean, it has proven across the industry and the market has spoken. So what direction do you think research and development should then take so
Yeah.
that it, gets the best of both worlds?
Yeah, it's interesting. This is something I have a lot of discussions about with people. Is that so? I'll first start out with that in academia, especially if you're trying to get a PhD, the goal is to push the boundaries of what humanity is capable of. So I want to be conscious of that because it's like you do want to push the boundary. It's important, while at the same time, robotics it's not really a growing industry. It's more like it's an industry that's trying to grow so hard and it's hitting like a brick wall, like a 10-foot brick wall. And so what I would suggest to people in academia is to focus heavily on teaching people about how to make robotics accessible. Generally that's through affordability. It's just by making it cheaper. Basically focusing, for example, a person instead of focusing on, and I see this a lot, like instead of focusing on making SLAM 10% better or making this visual, bag of words slightly better, which really isn't going to affect that much. It could. I mean, I'm not saying it can't. It could eventually affect something in a big way. I would argue that 90% of people should be focusing on how do I make this piece of hardware more reliable? So how do I, for example, how do I make this $20 motor have a life cycle of 1 year instead of 6 months? It's a little bit more boring, but it's the kind of stuff that it's very profitable.
Mhm. But I mean, if, for example, like with the example which you yourself said, if you increase the lifespan of a motor, wouldn't that also not be so profitable for the manufacturer of the motor as such as well? I mean, wouldn't it go against that?
Yeah, that's a good point too, because if you increase the life cycle of a product, then less people will buy it. What I personally, so that, yeah, this goes into the whole like this goes into a whole like a crazy debate of like should you progress society or not. But what I would say about that is on a very basic level, if you make something better, it puts other people out of business, so you get more customers. So for example, one of my favorite brands of motors is called Griertison, and they're just very good, and they put so many other motors out of business. One of the problems with Griertison is that their torque is very little. So if a company could figure out how to increase the torque while keeping the same price, which is like 20 bucks per motor, essentially they would get all of my business and a bunch of other business. At the same time, anytime you progress society, anytime you progress technology, you'll need less and less. For example, a lot of people, for example, I post a lot. Like right now, I got about 10,000 followers, and 95% of them are positive, but 5% of them are the kind of people that just hate robotics. They hate robots. They think it's going to hurt society. They think, oh, if all these robots are here, then no one's going to have jobs, things like that. And my argument to that on a high level is while I understand the concern, I think there are so many problems in the world that we don't really need to worry about losing jobs. Like, there's like one of my biggest concerns is world hunger, and I want to focus heavily on solving world hunger with robotics. But there's education and there's war, and we haven't even gone to space yet. We haven't even colonized another planet yet. Elon Musk is trying to, and there's literally trillions of planets. So I think the
Mhm.
argument that like robots are going to take jobs is, in my opinion, not valid. So robots obviously will take jobs, but there will be more jobs that will be created to maintain what people basically to fill what people need for jobs. That's my opinion. So
Yeah, I mean that I think I remember this pretty interesting report which I had read a while back kind of related to this. So when the first ATM machine was created, so everyone assumed, that all the tellers working in the banks would immediately get fired. But that did
Exactly.
not happen. Their role just transformed into people who are now selling more policies or new bank, uh, you know, products as such. So, I mean, we'll have our jobs. It will probably be more social. Probably the roles would change, but it'll still be there. Don't you think?
Yes, that's a good point. I also gave the ATM example that for for example, like back when I was younger, I'm not even sure if this happened to you, but when I was younger, I had to go into a bank to deposit a check.
Oh, okay.
Nowadays, yeah, like have you
Yeah.
done that?
Yeah, I've never done that.
See, that's crazy. That makes me feel old because I'm 28, but I look like I'm 20. But the point is, yeah, like I had to go into a bank to deposit a check. But around my college years, they started inventing this thing, about mobile deposits where you can take a picture of a check, and a lot of people like thought it was stupid. And that's just it. It's like people will always think new technology is stupid until everyone's doing it, right?
Mhm.
And they don't seem to realize that automation ultimately can there's always something left to automate, and basically because there's trillions of galaxies. So for that reason, I think it's kind of weird to think that people won't have jobs, but you know, I also want to be like compassionate to those people because they can be really rude, and like
Mhm.
it's kind of like, yeah, I understand. It's like if you're like you don't like education and you like working a basic job and you're feared for your family. I understand that. It's like, yeah, you have a family to look out for. I would simply say to those people, you know, you are smart enough, you're capable. There's a lot of ways to educate yourself and to move up. I would just say try that.
Good.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned, right, that you wanted to actually use robotics to combat world hunger. It's probably
Yeah.
the on the top of your list. So how exactly does that happen? Like, could you give some examples or some use
Sure.
cases?
Yeah, so I've been studying the agricultural robotic space for the last year pretty in-depthly, and let me give you an example. So let me give you an example of what probably not to do, and an example of what I'm doing. What I'm not saying I'm right, but I just, So probably what not to do is this. I won't say their name because I think they're a good company, but there's a company that is doing something very big in agriculture. They're trying to anyways, and their Crunchbase investment was about $30 million. And that's a lot. That's a lot of money, right? And they're doing something, and it's useful. No one denies that it's useful, but the robot costs $1.2 million. Now,
Okay.
just to give you perspective, 50% of farmers are in the negative, meaning they're not profiting, and the 50% that are profiting barely are profiting. And yes, there are some that are like really, really profiting, but they tend to have shady business practices, so I don't necessarily endorse that. But basically, what they found, and I know two people who are deep into this space specifically, and they actually know this company and who's buying their products. No one's buying their products. They have these great videos, these great demos. It's like, wow, look what we can do, and no one's actually buying it. And so, yeah, that's what not to do in solving world hunger is try not to build the coolest thing with all the features. But what I think people should do, this is what I'm doing, is building an affordable system that actually makes money. So what I'm doing, and I haven't actually released this publicly yet, so you're the first person to hear this, but uh,
Mhm.
yeah, your listeners have insights into this if this ends up working. But basically, I'm working on a project to automatically grow food using sensors and pumps. There are
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a lot of people get confused because they say, doesn't that already exist? But what they don't, but what the important thing to understand, and this is something that Elon Musk deeply understands, is that yes, electric cars exist, but does an affordable electric car exist? No. And because of that, he became a billion-dollar company. I'm trying to do the same thing for agriculture. I'm creating a system that affordably can grow food in a way that's basically never happened before. And if it works, then the average person can grow his own food for only essentially almost no money, and he'll actually be making money because he can sell his food. So that's basically my advice on solving world hunger is trying to create these really simple, affordable solutions that anyone could afford. For example, this solution I'm trying to make, essentially any person, even if they're in the lowest income bracket, could buy it and profit off of it. So
So that's an extremely sustainable
yeah,
approach. It's not just giving the person the fish, but also teaching them to fish in one
exactly.
shot. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it because, and the reason I love this idea so much is because I believe in a concept called decentralization of power versus centralization. Because what happens is if you try to centralize farming too much, is that now this gets into history and politics, but it actually starts wars. Like I don't know if you know this, but like back in the 1950s, there was a big war in Russia about they were trying to essentially take food from the poor farmers and give it to the military to fight the World War II in Hitler. What happened though was about I don't know the exact numbers, but 20 or 30 million people died. Like imagine if everyone you knew just died. That's actually what
Mhm.
happened in Russia 50 years ago. And I realized that the reason behind that was that there's a tendency for people and farmers and governments to centralize power. And what I'm trying to do is decentralize that so that anyone can grow their own food. You don't need anyone's permission to eat or to live. You don't need anyone's permission for that. You can live just by living off of your own land. And it is a big goal. You have to understand it's a big goal. So I don't know if it's going to work
Yeah.
out, but that's the plan anyway. So
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like an extremely beneficial goal. I'm sure you've heard of the United Nations SDGs as well. So I think the SDGs are meant to combat like 16 different issues. And I think world hunger, combating hunger is one of the primary, uh, tenets of that as well. So, I mean, that's actually pretty cool because we don't really think of when we think of robotics or the when it's told on a day-to-day scale, it's usually, either a humanoid or a robotic arm in a factory.
yeah,
We don't
yeah.
really think of it actually diverging into fields like never before. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about humanoids because like I'm connected with a lot of smart people. Like they're probably much smarter than me. Like they understand, and I'm talking about in the robotics, like the engineering aspect of it. They're very smart. All of them, every single one of them agrees that humanoids aren't a good idea. And I don't want to like say someone like Elon Musk is bad for doing that because I think that like there's promise and stuff like that, and he's obviously a genius. There's no doubt. Like he's probably one of the smartest people in the world. But one thing that all of us agree on is that robotics should not be this expensive do it all kind of thing. It should be more like doing one specific task or one specific thing and making it as affordable as possible. And I think it's great because like for example Elon Musk, his robot cost $20,000, and to give perspective, Atlas, which is Boston Dynamics robot, which they don't sell, but I'm pretty sure it costs about $500,000. So that's
Wow.
a big drop in price, right?
Yeah.
That's really good, right? At the same time, when you actually look at his computer vision algorithms and his locomotion gait, you can tell that he's like 10 years behind everyone else. And what that means practically is that probably it'll have a hard time actually selling it. At least that's what people think. Like for example, I love his Tesla car. I love his SpaceX. Um, it's a little hard to get behind the humanoid robot just because I don't see a use for it, but that's just me. It could also be a
Mhm.
really, really smart marketing ploy, and if it is, then that in itself is good enough. So
Yeah.
we'll see.
Hmm. So, I mean, if humanoids are not, as efficient or probably as useful as they are at least touted out to be, what do you think the ideal, future affordable robots, what do you think they look like? Like what kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
locomotion?
So the way it's a very difficult concept to explain, but the way I try to explain it is like people tend to think, and this is how I used to think too, right? People tend to think um, what already works and copy that, and that's why people are interested in humanoids, for example. Humans are very efficient at everything they do, and but humans are efficient at being intelligent and generalists. And to give you an example, the average factory, they're just machines. They do various stuff. So it's kind of like have you worked within like an A star algorithm, for example?
Yeah.
Yeah, and if people don't know what that is, it's just a path planning algorithm that you're given a map and you have to go from A to B. That's it. Like, how do you go from A to B in the shortest path, not the most general path? So it's the same thing with robots. It's like if you want to, you have to think of the goal and then think of the easiest way to do that. Now, sometimes that will be a drone, sometimes that'll be a rover, sometimes it could be a humanoid, probably not. It could be, in my case, it's just pumps. That's it. It's just, there's no motion at all. So you
Mhm.
would have to think of a very specific goal. Like let's say the goal is like I can't even think of anything. Like moving potted plants from one part of a farm to another. Well, it depends. If you
Mhm.
only need to move a few pots every day, use a drone. If you need to move a large amount, a medium distance, use rovers. If you need to use, you know, if you just need to move a short distance, you don't even need robots at all. So
Yeah. So it's going to be a future where there's all kinds of robots probably working together or separately, but doing their particular task as well as
mhm.
possible.
I think
Yeah, I
so.
mean that sounds pretty good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, yeah. Speaking coming to Void Robotics as such, like, how exactly did you start it off? Like, I mean, the idea of starting a company. I mean, especially just after a few years after graduation, it's still something which, scares quite a few
Yeah.
people. So, what exactly pushed you to go the entrepreneurial route?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot, and honestly, I have no idea. Like there wasn't like well personally I'm a strong Christian, so I mentioned sometimes that I feel like God led me into this direction, but honestly, like I went out of college and like there wasn't anything specific. Like there wasn't a specific problem or a specific anything. I just kind of felt like I should start a business because I think the best way of explaining is that I knew I'm not a 9 to 5 kind of person. And there's nothing wrong with 9 to 5. It's like some people really love that. Like my best friend loves 9 to 5, and that's fine. You know, like business owners need to hire 9 to 5ers. I know for me, I just would hate it. I like to be creative. I like to think about this or that. I like to lead and manage. So I kind of just thought, all right, I'll start this business on the side. Back then it was called Humanoid Robotics. And then I got copyright sued over it. And I was so young. I was like 23. And then these guys are like, oh, you stole our copyright. I didn't even know what a copyright was half the time. And so yeah, and then I just decided, and that's what I encourage. If I think you said most of your audience is younger people, I encourage younger people to really follow your passion. You do need money, and that's important, to have a stable income. But what's the purpose? What's the point, right? If you're gonna be like 60 and you give up on all your life dreams, what's the point, right? So I'd say like really deeply follow your passion. What do you want to do? Because I've never really regretted it. Like I've had struggles. Like I'm not making a ton of money, you know, but I'm learning a lot, and eventually I think I'll succeed. Um, so yeah, that's basically how I kind of got started. It was just sort of came to me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And what do you think are the main, probably the biggest differences between starting a regular company versus something like robotics, something as multidisciplinary as robotics?
Yeah, that's a good question because I see a lot. I've even had conversations with a lot of people who are business oriented, and they're just like, oh, I started a restaurant business, or I started app business. What's the difference? So what I would say to people is that the best analogy or example I can give is that there are two types of businesses. There are copy businesses and R&D businesses. And there's really only two types. So for example, if a person wanted to start a clothing store, that's a copy business. You copy what already exists. You copy the manufacturing process, you copy the retail option, you copy the hiring of the managers. All you got to do is like essentially go ask someone else who did it and copy everything they did. And then yes, you can also add a little bit on top of that to differentiate yourself, which is usually the hard part. But at the end of the day, it's a copy business. Like if you were going to build a house, robotics is like an R&D business. It's not like building an app which you could copy other ideas or people from. It's something that almost no one has succeeded with. Like there are some examples like iRobot and like yeah, I always try to think of positive examples of robots, and it's difficult. Like there's iRobot and like even Boston Dynamics, a lot of people don't know this. They're not actually like really profiting. Most of their money comes from the government. So I don't fully consider them to be a success, but they're very like very smart. But when it comes to purely profitable companies, I genuinely can't think of many. So it's one of those things where um, if you want to start a robotics company, definitely should, but understand that it's unlike anything. It's like starting a space company. Almost no one has done it besides like NASA. So try to come at it with a long-term vision. You know, you might not succeed in the first 5, 10 years. I mean, I haven't, right? But you'll learn a lot. You'll meet a lot of smart people. You'll have a lot of fun, and you know, I don't know. I believe I'll succeed eventually. So, and I
Hmm.
kind of am. I built a robotics kitchen. I built some products here and there. So, you know.
Okay. That's actually pretty insightful. I mean, the whole idea of copy businesses versus R&D businesses, it's not something I've actually really thought of before. That's pretty interesting because yeah, it makes sense. I mean, everything has to fall under one of those two categories. It's either new or an improvement upon something. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty cool. And what do you think about the recent innovations in the field of robotics? Like whether it's with respect to, the uh, not just robotics, but also automation. Like recently with Chat GPT, just blowing the news up and how everyone's just saying, this is going to be the end of assignments about various robotics R&D developments, whether it's coming from MIT. So how do you think all these various pieces of the puzzle are going to come together as we move towards the future?
Yeah, so I could say a lot about ChatGPT. You have no idea, but in short about ChatGPT, it's amazing. I do think it's going to revolutionize education because a lot of people don't understand that, you know, basically what I try to tell people is that school shouldn't be about memorization. It should be about problem solving because memorization was good for an age that didn't have the internet, but for an age that has essentially the world's knowledge at your fingertips, try to focus more on problem solving, which is like, in my opinion, a higher form of education. ChatGPT basically, enhances that. At the same time, it's not perfect. It can't really solve. It can't, in my opinion, ChatGPT can't solve problems. It can only reiterate information, very similar to Google. Like ChatGPT might be a rival to Google, but it's not going to rival like a human. People think it could, but I don't. So when it comes to the latest advances in robotics, that's also a very good question because one of the reasons I'm in robotics is because I think we're at a place in society where I feel like it's never been before, and it's a very big claim. But in my opinion, there's been a lot of big revolutions in the world's history. There was the first agricultural revolution. There's the political revolution. There was the medical revolution, and these revolutions essentially promoted society to a much better stage. In my opinion, and yeah, recently we went through the information revolution, where that's stuff like Microsoft, Apple, they gave us information at a moment's notice. And I think that's great. But I think we're at the next biggest revolution, which I believe to be the labor revolution. Not robotics revolution. I call it the robotics revolution because it sounds better. But it's really the labor revolution, a revolution where ideas are not limited by the the minimum wage you have to pay people. So what that practically means is that if done correctly and not centralized, that something like world hunger will be a thing of the past. And that's what I'm passionate about. It's like world hunger essentially right now is limited by how many people can farm. But if robots were doing it, you wouldn't really need to worry about that. And I think that with the latest advances in like Arduino and ROS and Jetson, especially NVIDIA and their GPUs, I personally think in the next 50 years, like there's going to be a huge robotics revolution. So
Mhm. And like you said, loads of companies have failed in this space. What do you think, apart from affordability and apart from a great focus on practicality rather than being extremely fancy, what are the traits do you think the companies which are going to lead into the future are going to actually possess?
hmm. Like for robotic companies or just companies in general?
For robotics companies.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so I think a mindset of affordability is definitely like, at least for me, that one of the highest. But uh, so I know what the answer is, but I don't know how to explain it. So well, I wouldn't say I know what the answer is, but what I believe the answer to be is what is needed most for a robotics company is the mindset of problem solving.
Mhm.
So yeah, I don't really know how to explain it, but like yeah, I would say like 90% of robotic companies I've seen are very, very smart, but they're trying, and if you ask them, are you solving a problem? They'll say yes. They'll say, yes, I am solving a problem. But it's not enough just to solve a problem. You have to solve a big enough problem. And then there are companies who say, yes, I am solving a big problem. Like I know a company, I won't say like specifically, but they're solving like a really big problem. But then it's like you have to kind of, it's almost like getting philosophical about it, or at least very business oriented. It's like you are solving a big problem, but it's not just the problem you're trying to solve. You're trying to solve like the financials behind the problem. So
Mhm.
so basically, instead of like yeah, it's kind of just getting deeper into it. Trying to figure out like I think the companies of the future are the ones who really deeply understand a niche, and they can just solve that individual problem. So
Uh,
like
so
one
it's
thing,
Mhm.
yeah, like so one thing I say is that one of the only companies I can think of as a success is iRobot. Yeah, I believe there are definitely others, but who are mildly successful. But they're one of like the really, really big examples of a success. But if you look into like how they created the robot vacuum, it was kind of just another idea that happened to take off. It wasn't like predicted. Um,
Mhm.
so you know, one thing I think is very interesting. I don't know if people know this, but um, Microsoft, Bill Gates actually he actually believed that the internet would never get as big as it did. He was just building a computer. Can you believe that? One of the richest people in the world didn't even believe in his own idea. And what
Mhm.
that shows me is that the people of the future are not those who can do something. It's those who understand something. Such as I think a better example of someone who does understand something is like Steve Jobs, who was really deeply able to understand everything about phones, such an extent that he built, arguably one of the world's best devices. So
Yeah. So it's mostly about disrupting the entire idea which goes behind the problem as such,
yeah,
rather than just, solving the problem in either the most expensive way or the most impractical way, but just changing the way in which we perceive or even think about the whole problem. Yeah. I mean, that's, as you said, that's pretty much what the iPhone did. Before that, we had those button phones and extremely, uh, hard devices, and then the iPhones came.
did,
It
did you ever
completely changed.
did you ever have like a flip phone?
Yeah, my parents did. I used to play the snake
Yeah,
games and stuff on that. That's
yeah,
as far as my memory goes. Yeah.
yeah. I used to have flip phones for a long time. I remember my dad was saying like, I'll never use a smartphone. These things are stupid. They're gonna waste my time. Now he texts more than me, so goes to show,
Yeah. And I even remember with the first time when Apple released their AirPods, everyone was like, this is such a terrible design, because it
Yeah,
looked pretty bad and stuff. And I read somewhere that AirPods alone makes more revenue than the entire business of Spotify. So that just
probably, yeah,
goes to
yeah,
show,
yeah,
how something which people might not really catch on to immediately can just go on to really being something pretty massive.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So yeah, I mean, now I guess we can conclude. So, are there any final recommendations, probably any resources, books, anything which you feel that
Hmm.
people should know, and any concluding remarks, advice, which you'd like to just hand out?
Sure. If I guess for people interested in getting into robotics, I would recommend. So personally, I like the ROS2 wiki. I know it's very basic. That's probably what a lot of people get, but just spending time learning the basics of Linux, I always find that's the best way of getting started. Just focusing on the ROS2 wiki. Um, and I also recommend because I believe a lot of the audience is younger, trying to get into the robotics space. So it's important to understand that when I got into robotics, there were a lot of jobs, but now there isn't. Like I was just talking to someone who's like desperately trying to find a robotics job and he just can't. He's a very smart guy, but if he's one of if he's one, if you have to think of it like a numbers thing. If you're like if you're just one out of a million, and there's only a handful of robotic startups, then you have to be like top 1% or whatever, or start your own company, which is what I did. I was also a part of startups too, but I would highly recommend people to consider like getting a job that is in their domain. So whether that be software, mechanical, or electrical, getting one of those jobs and then maybe starting a little project on the side.
Okay. Yeah, that seems like a extremely, fair way to play it smart rather than just
Yeah.
go all in. Yeah. And what about any resources, any of your anything which you tune into, anything which you actively, read or engage in, which you think people should know about?
I don't know. I don't really have any resources. You can follow me on LinkedIn. I post a lot about the latest in robotics, and I also talk about robotics a lot, so you can learn more from me on LinkedIn. I'm generally not a fan. Now, this is just my personal thing. I'm generally not a fan of books or like uh, courses and such because they tend to teach you more about engineering than leading a business.
Mhm.
So yeah, I don't know. Yeah, unfortunately, I can't give you too much. Honestly, I can't think of anything right now.
All right. Yeah, that seems fair. So yeah, I mean, this was an extremely interesting conversation. I mean, we practically went over quite a lot of topics, going from entrepreneurship, business, even philosophy for that matter, world problems, and so on. So I feel that, it's really changed my perspective with respect to how exactly we view things, because currently, even as I'm doing my master's, the primary focus is on trying to improve efficiency or trying to actually improve the time or make it
Yeah.
better, but at the cost of more resources. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty important. It seems to be a change which is probably yet to come, where people actually need to focus more on the entire practicality, making it more affordable, like other industries, and then hopefully, there'll be this phase where robots are everywhere, probably like how we imagined it a couple of decades ago.
Yeah, that would be so cool. Love that.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So yeah, thank you so much, Nathan. This was terrific. So yeah, guys, hope you loved this episode. Tune into the next one as well. We will be having more such sessions moving forward. See you guys.